we're all set, thank you.
Great, thanks.
And when you speak at the podium,
Yeah.
I think I'll probably, since you do have the mic, I'm going to mute this mic.
Okay.
And I'll just put this. Well, let me leave it here.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah. Okay. That
And
works.
I'll mute it, and you can just try to ignore it.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. Thank you for doing the parking.
So how are things going at Indiana? Yeah, I know. But you are in the center, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like
Yes,
center.
yes, exactly. I mean, I like the way our university responds, like residential response.
Yes, yes. Send a big to
Oh, good, good,
They
good.
not strongly the way we push it.
Yes, of course, yeah.
But it's good.
Relatively speaking, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Students are they have to be, and what's the most important is really to create console. Because how can we how it has the Senate, the House, and everything else. No, of course, it's not if you think of it like person could that is completely instructive to the principles of the position. So you really have a very for 2 years until you see what the done because in 4 years it will do it.
Yeah. I would say that. I would think that for the whole. It'll come back to the meeting.
You know what he did?
I see him on campus.
I did it.
Oh, yeah. No,
I hope the father stretches on for a year. That's all. Sitting over there.
how about a lot of points for the
There is fear of the Lord.
It's all great.
And you know, say that American students have nothing but the fathers.
Yeah.
Seconds.
Michigan State. Yeah. Islamic studies. How long are you doing this? Year and a half, almost 2 years. Wow. We should bring you guys to Michigan State.
You coming to the show tomorrow?
I have the obligation. I really want to go.
Well, if you bring us to Michigan
I'll bring you to Michigan State. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, well, when the panel discussion begins, you can turn your microphone on. Simple press, and you'll see the little indicator go on. We can leave it off until then, just to save the
Violin, huh?
And you may need to pull this.
I just got one recently, but
I can control.
oh, is it?
If you have any problems.
All right, good evening. Oh, it's not evening. It just feels like evening. I'm sorry. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Pauline Jones. I'm the director of the Islamic Studies curriculum, which is co-sponsoring this event today with the University Musical Society. The session today, or the I don't know what I want to call it, a community forum today, we started to call it a community forum on Islamophobia. Then it sort of got changed to investigating Islam, and then politics sort of changed such in the country quite drastically that we thought it really should focus mostly on Islamophobia. The timing couldn't be better or worse given your perspective, or depending on your perspective, for such an event. And what we wanted to do was really to take advantage of the fact that we have this amazing production here at the University of Michigan, thanks to the University Musical Society, Ping Chong and Company's production of Beyond Sacred, Voices of Muslim Identity. And we want to take advantage of it really to highlight the role that media projects such as this can play in general, in constructing positive images of Muslims, in fostering community dialogues like this one, and in countering Islamophobia, which, as we know, unfortunately, is at an all high in this country. We've asked 2 faculty members to join us, who I'll introduce in a few minutes. And now we have 3 cast members joining us from Beyond Sacred to speak really about their own experiences, to speak frankly about their own experiences. We then invite you as members of the community, members of the campus, the broader campus community, to join the discussion after the panelists have made brief discussion. So let me just say a few words about each of the speakers. I'm just meeting the cast members for the first time and getting to know them and finding out that they are students themselves, which is amazing, wonderful that they can be part of this production, which I'm sure is very demanding, and be full-time students at universities in New York. So we have with us Tiffany Abdelghani, who is at LaGuardia Community College studying public relations and hopes to go on to grad school. We have Kadin Herring, who is not just a performer, but also a film producer and a violinist, which I just think is amazing, and a student at the New School, who's also going on to graduate school, hopefully in an MFA, a Master's of Fine Arts, he says. And we have Amir Khafagi, who is himself a student at CUNY, City University of New York, studying urban affairs. So these are very busy individuals, once again, very appreciative that they're here today, sharing their experiences. For the faculty members, we have Professor Rudolph Ware, who is an associate professor of history at the University of Michigan, specializes in pre-modern West African history, has research interest in Islam, popular religious culture, and race, and a very well-received, well-regarded book entitled The Walking Quran, Islamic Education, Embodied Knowledge, and History in West Africa. I recommend you read it. It's a fantastic read. We also have Muhammad Hassan Khalid, who is joining us from Michigan State University, but he got all of his credentials here at the University of Michigan, which is why we keep inviting him back. He is an associate professor of religious studies, an adjunct professor of law, and director of the Muslim Studies program at Michigan State University. He has 2 books with Oxford University Press on salvation, discourse, and Islamic thought, and is now completing a book for Cambridge University Press on jihad, radicalism, and popular Western conceptions of jihad. He has received all his degrees, as I mentioned, from the University of Michigan. He and Professor Ware both teach for our DISC, Digital Islamic Studies curriculum. So that's another reason why they're here joining us today. So thank you, everyone, for being here. I really hope that we can have a very respectful and very open, honest, and interesting dialogue. What we're going to do is we're going to start with presentations. I don't think we agreed on an order beforehand. Or did we, Ariel? Okay, that sounds wonderful. So we'll go from left to right. My left, your right to left, and my left to right, starting with Professor Khalid. Once everyone finishes giving a short presentation, we can open the dialogue to the audience with a number of questions that Ariel Millet has put together for us today, who I didn't introduce, but I should. This is our amazing program coordinator for the Digital Islamic Studies curriculum. Yeah, without her, there would be no such thing. She does everything. I just show up. She does everything. So thank you. And Mohammed, if you could start us off.
Well, good afternoon. Oh, is that too loud or is that okay? It's okay? All right. I'd like to begin by thanking the organizers, Professor Pauline Jones and Ariel Mallet. I spent a decade of my life as a student here, and I spent many, many days in this building. So it's great to be back. In the brief time that I have, I'd like to say a few words on Islamophobia and contemporary U.S. politics. Let's begin with the term Islamophobia. The Cambridge Dictionary defines it as an unreasonable dislike or fear of and prejudice against Muslims or Islam. So it encompasses a lot of different things. A few years ago, Time magazine posed a provocative question. Is America Islamophobic? Now, I'm not sure how one can answer this question, given that there exists a range of attitudes on Islam and Muslims among Americans, be they politicians or everyday citizens. But the Islamophobia question is one that more and more people are asking these days, in large part because of the candidacy, election, and now presidency of Donald Trump. President Trump himself has maintained that he is not an Islamophobe. Back in September of 2015, he told CNN's Jake Tapper, "I love the Muslims. I think they're great people." A mere 3 months later, however, he famously and infamously called for a complete and total shutdown of Muslims entering the country until we can figure out what's going on. Notice where he drew the line. It wasn't specific enough to target the particular ideologies of terrorists who represent a tiny fraction of the Muslim population, and it wasn't broad enough to encompass all foreigners or adherents of all religions. He drew the line at Muslims, a category encompassing nearly a quarter of the world's population, numerous sects and denominations, a wide spectrum of viewpoints, and of course, Zayn Malik. And obviously, the one thing that unites Muslims is their affiliation with Islam, however strong or weak that affiliation might be. This would suggest that as Trump sees it, Islam is a problem. In fact, this is precisely what he indicated last March when he said, "I think Islam hates us." Frankly, I'm not sure what to make of this statement. What does he mean by Islam? And who, pray tell, is us? Should we take it as a given that Muslim Americans are not part of us? Such questions must be taken seriously now that Trump has been sworn into office. And in case you missed it, this was the most watched inauguration of all time. Now, Trump has reassured us that he has Muslim supporters, and he truly does. Furthermore, he maintains that his recent executive order banning travel for citizens from 7 Muslim-majority countries was not a Muslim ban. But frankly, it's difficult to give him the benefit of the doubt, especially when it was precisely a Muslim ban that he called for a little over a year ago. And consider this recent revelation by Rudy Giuliani. When asked if the recent executive order was actually a Muslim ban, Giuliani responded, "So, when he first announced it, he said, Muslim ban. He called me up and said, put a commission together. Show me the right way to do it legally." And what we did is we focused on, instead of religion, danger, end quote. Oops, let me go back. We will save that for later. Danger. Never mind the fact that we are much, much more likely to be shot at by other Americans than to be attacked by a terrorist from any country, let alone the so-called banned ones. In any case, and here's the key point, Giuliani's statement suggests that the original intention behind the executive order was indeed a Muslim ban. But since a Muslim ban would have been impossible to justify legally, it had to be tweaked. And as last week's ruling indicates, the tweaking thus far has not been enough. Now, the idea that Muslims are a problem is in line with the clash of civilizations paradigm championed by some of the individuals close to Trump, such as his chief strategist, Steve Bannon, and his now former national security advisor, Michael Flynn. Incidentally, here's a tweet by General Flynn that's not even a year old. It reads, "Fear of Muslims," notice he didn't say radical Muslims, just Muslims, "is rational. And he links to a video clip that criticizes the term Islamophobia and references various attacks committed by Muslim terrorists. And of course, collectively, such terrorists do not make up a percent of the Muslim population, and their largest group of victims is actually Muslims. As for Trump supporters, I'm not going to tell you that most are Islamophobic, but some undoubtedly are. Here's a Trump enthusiast standing outside the Republican convention in Cleveland this past summer. His sign expresses a common Islamophobic assumption. If you're a real Muslim, if you take the Quran seriously, then you must be a jihadist, which is typically taken to mean a terrorist, or at least a terrorist sympathizer. This is similar to the popular Islamophobic belief that terrorism in the name of Islam is simply the result of a straightforward reading of Islamic scripture. The reality, however, is that terrorists often engage in mental acrobatics in order to justify their heinous acts. And if it comes up later, I'd be happy to elaborate on this point. In any case, this notion that Islam itself is the direct cause of terrorism might help to explain why Trump and others think Islam hates us. In fact, the threat of Islam is perceived to be so grave that according to a recent Reuters report, Trump intends to focus his counter-extremism program solely on Islam. Incredibly, this report came out just a few days after a deadly shooting in neighboring Canada at a Quebec City mosque by Alexandre Bissonnette, a young man who reportedly was fond of Trump and held white nationalist and anti-Muslim views. And it was just a few months ago that 3 Kansas City men who called themselves Crusaders were arrested for plotting to bomb a local housing complex and mosque in an attempt to kill many Muslims. It is beyond me why anyone would choose not to pay attention to the threat of domestic terrorism by far-right groups. Of course, most hate crimes are nowhere near as extreme as these examples. But despite some cases of false reporting, we know that hate crimes against Muslims, and of course others, including Trump supporters, by the way, have become more frequent since the election. We've also witnessed a rise in hate speech by individuals who feel emboldened by Trump's success. Here's an anti-Muslim poster that recently turned up on multiple college campuses, including Rutgers. It reveals profound ignorance. Here we see an image of the World Trade Center, which was constructed in 1973 when America was certainly not Muslim-free. In fact, Muslims have been here since slavery. But the implied message is that without Muslims, the Twin Towers would still be standing. And yet, interestingly, the very construction of the towers was made possible by a Muslim immigrant. Here's a famous Muslim architect, an immigrant from Bangladesh named Fazlur Rahman Khan, who created the tube frame design that would be used to construct the World Trade Center. By the way, Khan was the architect who designed the Sears Tower, now called Willis Tower, the John Hancock Center, also in Chicago, and the Hajj terminal of King Abdulaziz International Airport in Saudi Arabia. All these structures came into existence because of a Muslim immigrant. And while we're on the topic of 9/11, I must also draw attention to the often overlooked Muslim heroes of that day. One such hero is Muhammad Salman Hamdani, a Pakistani immigrant and a practicing Muslim who reportedly ran toward the Twin Towers to help people, not because he was required to, but because he wanted to, and tragically lost his life in the process. I had the privilege of meeting his family this past summer as part of a documentary I'm working on the Muslim victims of 9/11. And then there's Abdul Malahi, the Yemeni Muslim immigrant who worked at the Marriott Hotel at the World Trade Center. Malahi went from room to room trying to save people and succeeded in saving the life of a man named Don Monroe, whom I had the privilege of speaking to by phone a few months ago. Fortunately, Malahi himself did not survive. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that whoever made those Muslim-free posters has no idea about anything I just described. Because of the nature of the media, many Americans know a lot about the 9/11 hijackers who brought down the towers, but possibly nothing about the Muslim architect who paved the way for its construction or the Muslim heroes of that day. In closing, I'm not exactly sure what Donald Trump believes in his heart of hearts. But given that he has not been anywhere near as forceful in condemning Islamophobia as either Barack Obama or George W. Bush was, it is perhaps not surprising that many Muslims feel, frankly, that the current administration doesn't care much for them. In fact, many have never felt more vulnerable than they do right now. And yet, amazingly, many of these same Muslims have never received as much support as they have this past year. Indeed, they have been championed by many citizens whose defense of Muslims and others appeals to widely accepted American principles and values. What is more, Muslims have never played a more prominent role in government than they do now. And for all of the negative images of Muslims that one encounters in the media, there are now more positive images as well. Images that bring out the humanity of Muslims. And if this positive spirit persists, I suspect the history books of our children will portray some of the political trends and tendencies we're now witnessing as obvious examples of fear-mongering and intellectual laziness. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa ta'ala barakatuhu. Peace be upon you and God's mercy and blessing. So I teach the history of Islam in Africa for the Digital Islamic Studies curriculum, and I want to join the chorus of people that are thanking Ariel, and also to give a brief round of applause for Pauline Jones, who, as director of the Islamic Studies program, wrote the grant that resulted in what eventually became the Digital Islamic Studies curriculum, and who has given extraordinary support to the study of Islam, both in an academic way and in ways that are responsive to the community. Since becoming director of the International Institute, she's particularly also been the patron saint of a research initiative that I direct called Ikhlas, which is the research initiative for the study of Islamic knowledge, histories and languages, arts and sciences, which brings together university-trained academics and community-based Muslim scholars in collaborative research projects for the study of Islam. So she's doing extraordinary work, and we're grateful for the organizers of this event. As someone that teaches Islam in Africa, and Pauline mentioned my book, The Walking Quran, I'll just underline something that our first speaker mentioned, that is probably a good way to start thinking about historical antidotes to the problem of Islamophobia, and that's to recall that Islam arrived in these shores before there was a United States of America. The first documented instances of Muslims in the Western Hemisphere come on slave ships to New Spain, what's now Mexico, in the 1500s. And Muslims are documented as early as 1507 in what's now Mexico. And indeed, Muslims are spread throughout all of the colonies of North America, representing between 10 and 15% of the total volume of the Atlantic slave trade, a trade which carried between 12 and 20 million people over the span of 4 centuries and brought them into the New World. So when people like to try to convince you that Islam is something that's alien to the West or something that doesn't belong here, the history of my ancestors says differently. And I'm working on a book currently that actually follows the histories of some enslaved African Muslims who were brought to South Carolina and Georgia and Louisiana in the 1770s and who made profound contributions to the history of revolutionary and emancipatory thought. And indeed, in chapter 3 of the Walking Quran, I talk a little bit about that as well. So that's going to kind of actually be the focus of my talk, is that I'm going to put Islamophobia in dialogue with racism. Because the fact of the matter is many Muslims will be just as ignorant of those facts that I just mentioned as non-Muslims would be. The story of African Muslims and the role of African American Muslims in Islam is something that's often elided and overlooked. And I want to offer a Quranic reading on the origins of both racism and Islamophobia before we finish here today. And it's rooted in the scholarly tradition of West African Islam that I research and that I write about. So I'll begin with a story. And it's short. It's about a time when I was called to give the Friday sermon for the Muslim Students Association last summer, when every day that we turned on the news, a different black man was being gunned down unarmed in the streets of the United States of America. And in that sermon, I told the people who, most of the students on this campus of Muslim background are of immigrant background. Most are born here, but most of them, their parents immigrated here. And I reminded them that a day was likely coming very soon, that they would want black people standing alongside Muslims, that the hunting wouldn't end with black people, and that there would be a day that Muslims would want black folks standing next to them, and that day was likely coming soon. And then I reminded them of a surah of the Quran, a chapter of the Quran, Surah Taha, which tells the story of Moses. And it reminds that actually not all of the people that followed Moses were Jewish. Many of them came from different ethnic groups. And I told them in that sermon that if you don't stand with the children of Israel of this country, if you don't stand with the oppressed of this nation, then prepare to be counted amongst the people of Pharaoh. Prepare to be counted amongst those who oppress. And it's one of the things that's actually comes in authentic prophetic narration, is that God has forbidden oppression upon himself. So oppression always originates in human beings, and the prayer of the oppressed against an oppressor is always answered, whatever faith they have. So that was last summer, and then came the events of this year's election and the events that followed this year's election. And we were asked to talk about Islamophobia and our experience of it. We had two Muslim women who were assaulted within a couple of blocks of this campus. They were threatened to be burned alive if they didn't remove their headscarves, and they had headscarves pulled off of their heads. And I was asked by our Muslim chaplain to deliver khutbah again for the Muslim Students Association the week after this had happened. And I'm proud to say that the president of the university, President Schlissel, attended that Friday sermon, as did a number of interfaith groups from around Ann Arbor, so that instead of our normal 200 or 250 students, we had about 600 people in attendance. And it was a beautiful show of solidarity. And I'll tell you now what I told them then, which is that the Quran views circumstances like the current trial of discrimination that we're facing in a very unique way. Without exception, in the Quran, anytime God wants to raise the status of an individual or a people, he first delivers them directly into the hands of their enemies. And this also came from the chapter about Moses in the Quran. It's an amazing passage. God is reminding Moses of the favor that he showed upon him when he was a child. And he said, I showed you favor when I inspired in your mother what I inspired in her. Put him in the basket, cast the basket on the river will cast him on a bank. He'll be delivered to an enemy, to him and to me, that I may bestow my love upon him and raise him under my eye. So that when we find these times of difficulty, these times of tribulation, these times of travail, these times of discrimination, it's actually a tremendous opportunity for us to raise our station and to find ourselves and to see ourselves under God's watchful eye. And I called upon them to look at the current situation in that way. I also reminded them, because I can be blunt in that way, that while a woman can take off her headscarf and a man can take off his kufi, I can't take the black off. It's not something that I can remove. And therefore, people need to be reflecting about Islamophobia within a broader context of discrimination and oppression, rather than narrowly retreating inside personal identity politics and seeking to defend just the homeland, whatever that is for that individual. And that was connected to another sort of Quranic teaching that comes from the West African tradition of Islamic scholarship, which is that, so from an Islamic standpoint, God is the best anthropologist, okay? God is the best anthropologist in that who better to do a study of man than the creator of man? And the story of the creation of Adam, the story of the creation of Adam and Eve, the story of the creation of humankind, gives profound lessons about how we understand racism and discrimination. It allows for a particular kind of sociological or anthropological perspective on the problem. So I'll ask you a question. Who, according to the Quran, is the first racist in history? Raise your hand if you've got an answer. Nobody wants to hazard a guess? Shaitan. Iblis, the devil, is the first racist mentioned in the Quran. And the reason is simple, and it's a profoundly instructive example. So first of all, when God wants to make a thing in the Quran, when he wants to decree a thing, he has only to say unto it be, and then it is. But that's not how he creates the human being. He creates the human being with his own two hands, not just through an external discursive act of speech, something that separates the speaker from the spoken. Instead, there's an intimate caress that takes the dirt of the earth and frames it into the mold of our common ancestor as human beings. Okay? And then he breathes of his own breath into the form of Adam in order to animate it. So there's a special intimacy and a special station given to the human being in the Quranic story of the creation. Already we should be thinking humanistically, and we should be thinking that there's something special about this human being. Moreover, every time the Quran uses the formulation Allah yuhib, God loves, the direct object of what God loves is a human being. So if God loves anything else in creation, he doesn't say so specifically in the Quran. Now, back to the first racist. When Iblis, when Shaitan is commanded to bow to this thing that God has made with his two hands, he refuses, and he says, I'm better than him. You made me from fire, you made him from clay. So he makes a claim that's rooted in origins and his bodily substance that is to make him superior. Human beings in that condition of being molded from dirt, it's not actually innate in the human being to have pride on the basis of origin. The way that they say it in Wolof in Senegal is, Amulu gana sufe suf. There's nothing lower than dirt. And that's what the human being is made from. So human beings don't have it in their innate disposition to tower over one another and say that they're superior on the basis of where they come from. In some innate way, we know that you can't get any lower than us. So anytime you see the spread of pride in origin, superiority complexes, standing on high and looking down one's nose at some other people, that's the spread of satanic religion. It's the spread of the religion of the first racist. That has deep implications for how we understand our current situation, because it means that our efforts to craft social and political interventions to deal with the problem of racism and Islamophobia and any other kind of pride are going to miss the mark. The great West African scholar, Ahmadou Bamba Mbake, a scholar from Senegal, he said, the cure for pride is to contemplate how your body was created. You are not, dear brother, above anyone. You begin your life as a nasty drop of sperm. You live your life as a walking sack of feces. And you end your life as a corpse, odious and rotting. You are all the children of Adam, and it is from dirt that you were made. How can anyone whose condition is this be guilty of pride? So if we can knock ourselves down a peg and not stand on high, then we can give a proper diagnosis as to the origin of our malady, as to the origin of this sickness of racism and Islamophobia and every other kind of expression of negative pride. And that has consequences for how we orient our action. Because once racism is understood in this way, then the proper diagnosis is that it is actually a sickness of the heart. And therefore, it cannot be cured by simple social or political interventions. It has to be cured through spiritual therapy. It has to be cured through an effort to cleanse the hearts of the children of Adam from the harm that they've done to one another. And I took it back to that moment, the girls having the scarves snatched off their head. In that moment, anger, the urge to defend your identity, the urge to defend who you are, makes a spot upon your heart. And then the next person that approaches you that is like the one that hurt you, you might hurt them. And I know of what I speak, because when I was in 5th and 6th grade, I got bused 45 minutes to an all-white school, and I got called nigger 5 times a week. And those were just the ones that I could hear. When I converted to Islam at the age of 15, I found that many of the Muslims of immigrant background were more racist than the white people that have been talking about me at school. So I understand something of the pain that this inflicts on the human heart and how you ultimately have to go through spiritual training in order to remove that. And and with that, I'm going to close with a reflection on what that means about how we move forward from dialogues like this about Islamophobia, about racism, about discrimination more broadly, which is that we have been copying the tactics of the American Civil Rights Movement for 2 or 3 generations now in an effort to craft social and political interventions that are going to help us cure the problem of racism and of Islamophobia and every other thing that comes underneath that same banner. But our interventions have largely been hindered by a misdiagnosis. The tactics were not the thing that produced the result. Sit-ins, protests, teach-ins, those go back to Thoreau in terms of how they're theorized in the Western tradition, and indeed there are traditions of nonviolent resistance that are older than that. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. What made the American Civil Rights Movement work is that it was rooted in an African American spiritual tradition that sought to tell a transcendent narrative about the shared origin and ultimate destiny of humankind. That it was a spiritual story, that people could find healing and truth in their hearts inside of that story. And indeed, the movement on which that was patterned, which was Gandhi's successful nonviolent movement, functioned in a similar way. It was his ability to articulate spiritual truths where people of Muslim or Hindu or any kind of background could find healing in them that allowed the success of that movement, not the strategies of nonviolent resistance themselves. Tactics will come and go. Articulating ancient truths in new language for a new time is the thing that actually brings transformative social change. So my call to all of us that are together reflecting on how we deal with the problem of Islamophobia is that we not deal with it in isolation, that we understand it as rooted in racial thinking, as rooted in complexes of religious superiority, as rooted in the original sin of the devil, which is pride. This instilled trait that human beings have now taken on to rank themselves as superior to others. And I call on us to work together to find that language that is going to articulate a vision of a shared human origin and a shared transcendent destiny that allows us to heal from the harm that we've done to one another. And I'll close as I began with greetings of peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Is that, yeah. It's on? You hear me? Oh, great. Okay, cool. Hello, everyone. Pardon us went to the bathroom, but maybe we hit it on our own. But basically, you want to add on Tiffany as well. My only my main concern for this panel, coming from the play perspective, was the more of the allyship that deals with Islamophobia in a way of kind of what the man said before me about how racism plays a part of how we're not addressing Islamophobia. For at least in New York, for my community organizing, a lot of it, the folks who have the space to give testimonies, or as well as the face of who they're being targeted, is typically a Middle Eastern cis male, typically. And something for myself, and I think for Mir, that we were discussing was of how we could change that face to make it more of a universal, more of a stage look of having African American descent, having women take more of the lead of who they're being targeted, and how each of their racial or their gender binaries are affected by Islamophobia. I wish Amir was here right now. As well as something also I was really curious about talking about in the Islamophobia panel was the notion that as folks who are not of Islam, or supposed to be our allies, basically, coming from the South, where I'm from, in our play, Tiffany, myself, and Amir, it touches base on all of our lives and how we matured in a post 9/11. Myself and Yasmin are both from the South, born in Florida.
I lived in Florida and Georgia.
Yeah, and I was in Florida and South Carolina, and much more conservative, much more of a white heteronormative environment. However, in that environment, that's typically the environment that we are dealt with as the Republican, the racist, the obvious trope of Islamophobic. But being more in academia and going to study in France and studying in New York City, my experiences have dealt with of how much of these people who are quote unquote my allies, these liberal folks, these middle class, blue collar folks who come from quote unquote diverse communities, are still so blinded to and even ignorant to giving actual critical help, or even taking the back burner to let people of color in Islam taking the brunt of the discussion. You want to say? I thought you were going to say something.
Not yet.
As well as those are my three main points that I was kind of bringing to the fold that I wished we could talk about more, because I'm seeing in this campus in University of Michigan, looking up before I came here, there's only like 2,000 Black students who go to this university. Muslim population, I have no idea, but I can imagine in America anyway, one of the biggest pool of people who practice Islam are African Americans, myself. However, typically when you hear of a person of Muslim, you think of a Middle Eastern folk, and that not only ignores a huge portion of the culture that we bring into Islam, but also the portion of why typically these middle class Pakistani or Saudi Arabian folks have the platform to come to academia, to give their voice, to give their stance of why Islamophobia is obviously a sin or wrong thing. But as a working class African American, that typically we don't have the kind of forethought to come to academia, to have the financial income to come to academia, to have a space in academia to give us our own spiel of why we are also just as affected with inner racism and outer racism in Islam. Want to add on anything?
I guess it's my turn. Is this on?
No.
There we go. You hear me now? I'm the worst with stuff like this.
What do I have to say? I find it, Islamophobia is a term I find somewhat problematic because it tends to individualize the problem as if it's arachnophobia or it's vertigo or it's any of these things that just you somehow acquire this fear and you don't know where it came from and something you have to get over, People who are scared of spiders, they say if you put you in a room full of spiders, you can get over it in an hour or two. I don't know if the same would be if you put an Islamophobic in a room full of Muslims and they will somehow be cured of their Islamophobia. I don't know if that's true or not. We haven't tested that out. We don't think, where does it come from? Did America all of a sudden become Islamophobic overnight? Did they go to sleep one night not even knowing what a Muslim was and woke up the next morning hating Muslims? No, that didn't happen. This was a campaign over decades that became implanted in the minds and embedded in the minds of Americans. White or black or Latino, Islamophobia is across the board. Why? Where is that fear coming from? Could be that you turn on the television and you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, the biggest enemy to the United States, besides North Korea occasionally, is a Muslim country. Muslims are always, there's always some plot that was uncovered. Usually that plot was instigated by the FBI and entrapped the people that were in that plot. And you become afraid. Every time we go to war, who have we been at war with? Who has the United States been at war with for over 30 years, if not Libya and Iraq, Somalia? Every nation on that Muslim ban list is a country that America is currently at war with. So we have to think of it in the context of American imperialism and white supremacy. I like to say Islamophobia is as American as apple pie because it came on when Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492, he brought Islamophobia with him. When the foundation of the United States is based on the enslavement and the oppression of black bodies, their bodies, minds, and souls, and the genocide of Native people. And that all other oppression of Chinese Americans, of Japanese Americans, of Irish and Jews and Italians and now Muslims is based on that original sin of the United States, the genocidal campaign to destroy Native peoples and the enslavement of black bodies. And that still resonates today. So when we talk about Islamophobia, we have to understand where it comes from. And that's how you're best able to fight it. And we never question, sometimes it's great if we get a Muslim in the city council in whatever city or in the House of Representatives or a Muslim senator. But are they going to still vote to bomb Somalia and bomb Libya and bomb Iraq and continue these never-ending wars? It doesn't matter if the president's Republican or Democrat. Obama had a kill list where he was killing the American citizen, the Yemeni cleric, who was, I forget where he was from. I think he was in the D.C. area. He was an American citizen. His son was an American citizen. They go back to Yemen, and Obama illegally bombs them with a drone. No questions asked. Nobody said, is that Islamophobia? Nobody says when America continues fighting, launching these wars in Libya and in Afghanistan and in Pakistan and in Somalia and in Iraq and now Syria. We never question, is that Islamophobia? That just seems to be the natural order of the day. But that war, that countless war, that war that never ends, our imperialist adventures overseas, that's the root of this fear of Muslims are. Regardless if the president is Barack Obama with a Muslim-sounding name who grew up in Indonesia, his father was a Muslim and he's cool and charismatic and he's America's first black president, but he continued those wars unabated. Guantanamo Bay is still there 8 years after his presidency, after he promised to close it 1 year after his election, and that didn't happen. We don't question, is that maybe what causes a lot of this irrational fear of Muslims? We don't talk about that. So I always like to bring it back that Islamophobia has its roots in American racism, and it has its roots in American imperialism and white supremacy. And within the Muslim community itself, there is, as the brother was pointing out, I have a lot of thoughts coming in at the same time, so bear with me. when you think of a Muslim, you think of an Arab, you think of a Southeast Asian, think of a man with a beard, and without understanding that the majority of Muslims in the United States are black. That's also the fastest growing population of Muslims in this country, after Latino. We don't think about that. My mother's Puerto Rican, she's a Muslim. You wouldn't think of her as a Muslim. She speaks fluent Arabic, she speaks fluent Spanish, she grew up in the Bronx, she's in the boogie down. That's who she is. That's what a Muslim is, right? But even within that, within the Muslim community, Arabs, Pakistanis, Bangladeshi, whatever it may be, they might, like my aunt, my aunt's Egyptian, she has an Egyptian daughter. If she brought home a black man as her husband, she would have a fit. You know, so because white supremacy gets exported into this, because you try to distance yourself away from being from black people because you somehow feel that black people are lesser than you, and that you don't want to be associated with that. Oh, I'm not like that. I'm an immigrant. You have an immigrant mentality. I came here. I pulled myself up by my own bootstraps, and I made it. And what's wrong with black people? They're living in the projects and they're lazy. This thought is still in the Arab community. It's still in. Mosques are segregated by different ethnic groups and different languages. So it's still, in our communities, we still have to overcome that barrier of racial oppression against black people. So it's hard for me to swallow the fact that Democrats now want to label Donald Trump as the biggest Islamophobic person. And this might be a very unpopular thought. But Islamophobia, Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, they were going to continue these endless wars, and you still have this idea that Muslims were somehow to be feared. And that's not true. So whenever I talk about Islamophobia, I always try to put it in the context of how it fits into racial oppression in the United States and imperialism. So, and that's how I hope we can continue in this dialogue. I should have got up on that. I would have looked cool, too.
You look cool from there, yeah.
I appreciate
yeah.
it. I appreciate it.
We had originally decided we have a list of questions that Ariel drafted, and we had thought it would be nice to have some dialogue between the audience and to sort of make this more participatory. I think, though, given the richness of the presentations and the diversity among the presentations, that there might be questions from the audience. And so maybe what we'll do is start there, and then I'll come in with some of these questions if we're not getting kind of to the heart of the matter. I mean, one of the questions that I have, which I think is sort of the $20 million question, right, is what is to be done, right? I mean, Butch, sorry, Professor Ware, you mentioned, the need for spirituality, but even broader, I think, well, that's pretty broad, but sort of what is the educational mission? I mean, part of the reason why, we started DIS, the Digital Islamic Studies curriculum, is because we thought that the way to combat this kind of fear and ignorance was with more knowledge, right? And I still believe that, but maybe I believe that because I'm naive and because I work at the university. Right? Maybe that's not the way. Maybe there are other better ways, or maybe the way that we do education at the university isn't the right way. Maybe it's community forums like this. I just wonder if any, Butch or others on the panel would like to speak to that question of what is to be done and what is the role specifically of educational institutions, particularly public education institutions like the University of Michigan. How can we do this better?
Please turn on your mic.
Hello?
Is yours on? Tiffany opted not to give a presentation. She wanted to be part of the discussion, and that's why.
Right here, right?
Yeah.
You may need to hold
Or you can go up there.
Yeah, you go up there.
I
While
want
we
to go
do
up there.
Okay, you don't have to do that.
It's not working?
I just pressed it.
Well, it can be loud. So.
Oh, that's good.
Thank you. So what I think is a good thing for communities to do is to bring different cultures together and learn about each other's culture and learn about how maybe one side does something and the other side does something else maybe differently, and like having this cultural appreciation for each other, where they can interact in like different settings. And I think like one thing, like if anybody had questions about like Islam, one thing that it's very good to do is to explore and find out on your own. And I converted to Islam, so I wasn't born a Muslim. My mother is Christian, my father is Muslim, and I grew up in a very like church-going household where I went to church every like Sunday since like I was like a teenager, and then I started to rebel and like didn't want to go to church anymore. And what I learned a lot about like different religions is that like exploring through different religions and exploring different cultures and people and appreciating them for who they are is so important, because when we realize that we're not so different, we have so many things in common that make us the same, and we're all living in human beings who experience and breathe, we bleed the same blood, we're exactly the same, but we may have different life experiences that we feel like we're different than other people because of what we experience throughout our lives, or maybe the color of our skin, or where we grew up, like that makes some people feel like they're better than you, or like you feel better than other people because of your social experience. But going to like a mosque, or going to a temple, or going to a church will help you realize that we're all connected in some way, and we are one humanity, one race, and we need to appreciate each other for who we are. Thank you.
Yeah. I'll offer a short one that builds off of what my mic comes back on. Yeah, it's flashing red, so that's never good.
Look, the battery's dead.
Okay. I would, in partial response to the question that Pauline asked, and then following on Tiffany's lovely comment. There's a saying of the Prophet, a hadith that says, "You will not enter the garden until you have believed, and you will not have believed until you have loved one another." So from an Islamic standpoint, love of humanity is actually a precondition for having faith, and having faith is a precondition for having paradise. And the Quran also says at the same time that the reason why God created human beings with different tongues and in different colors and from different nations is so that they will know one another. So when you put those two things together, you have to ask the question is, how are you going to love one another if you don't first know one another? If you don't create situations within which you can interact in a positive way, where you can come to understand something about where I come from, something about where you come from, something about your background, something about your culture. And the Quran repeatedly says that if God had wanted to, he would have made you all one people. So that there's wisdom in diversity to begin with. And the diversity is what allows knowledge to be produced when human beings come together. It's like we've all been given different pieces of a puzzle, and we have to work together in order to put the thing together as a whole. But we are stubbornly obstinate in our refusal to do so, because we retreat into our own tribes. Now, so what's the prescription? So I was asked a similar question for a teach-in, and the answer that I gave is that as thought leaders, university academics have a particular role to play, because many of us not only study different Islamic traditions, but we also practice them, and even those who don't practice study them carefully. And we can mine the resources of the communities that we study, and how they have fostered diversity, how we can bring out the best lessons in the different places that we study. When you study Islam in the Caucasus, you can bring forth the best of what's been learned from the historical experience of those people. I can offer you a reading of the Quran that's based in a 19th century West African scholar who had a philosophy of absolute nonviolence, and who also gave us that lovely quotation about the sin of pride, that we have to, because people will look to universities for spaces where we can start to have a better conversation, we actually have to be prepared to answer. We have to have done the work of studying the traditions that we do our research on, and bring forth the best answers for this time. So I think that it happens in forums like this. And I think that the one other thing that I would say is that it does also have to be, there has to be ethical work, not just knowledge training. That's something that universities didn't used to shy away from in the way that they conceived of their mission. If you go look at the front of Angel Hall, it'll say it'll say knowledge, justice, religion, and other things being necessary to good governance. It talks specifically about morals and ethics as central to the mission of the university itself. And that's the reason why for a course that I designed for this semester is called The Prophet, the Quran, and Islamic Ethics, that we have to find ways of using university environments to create that ethical conversation that will allow us to produce better answers, that will give people something of the spiritual teaching of Islam, not just an academic understanding of it. We don't have to clap after every comment, I don't think. I want to hear from the
Yeah.
I think the fastest way to get this knowledge is through media. If we can get hold of a good media. Yeah, if we can get hold of a good media, I think that can be the fastest way. We cannot promote of what we are doing good for the world or this country. Nobody knows this. What you mentioned here, I didn't know many things, that Muslims are doing this. So I think because we are lacking proper media exposure, so we are just falling behind in this.
Can I go off of what she's saying there, because I was thinking the same thing. Can anyone in this room sit here and say, on a television show they've watched growing up or now, where there was a Muslim character, or a major TV film that they saw where there was a Muslim character? It's this idea of, when you think about people living in areas that, we're talking about politics, that go red and they're, and people, when things don't affect them or people they know, they're much more inclined to just read what they see or believe what they see or what they hear. So if I live in a place where I know no Muslims, I know no black people, I know no Latino people, and someone gets on television and says that these people are taking your jobs, they're killing everybody that lives here and there and everywhere, and I have no other exposure to them, not only do they not live next to me, I don't even see them on television. I don't see them anywhere. It's true. So why wouldn't I say, let's get them out? So I think what I really think is a really important, because there's this idea of, being a black person, especially today, you hear from a lot of white people, how can I be an ally? How can I help? And it's this idea of, for me, what I think, it's this idea of, we live in the United States is a white nation. It's a Western white nation. That was how it was founded. That's who it was founded by. And we have to accept that, number one. But with that understanding, we as people of color always have to say, I can't go to your Trump-supporting cousins and say, I'm black, treat me well, because they'll spit in my face. But if you do that, if you know me, it's about knowing people and creating those relationships so that you can go to somebody and say that. I think the real issue that I see going on in this country is that the people that want to help, you can go up to someone and say, oh, I'm progressive, I'm liberal, all these different things. And then I say, well, how many black friends do you have, like, really, in your life? Well, I don't like to count. I don't see color. You know, I don't want to. That's so degrading to me for you to say that. It's because you don't have any. It's because you don't know any. And so you go around and you say, how can I help? Know us. We as people of color, I'm not getting off track, I swear, talking about people of color, but so many Muslim, you know, you talk about African American, a lot of my family members have converted to Islam. And the fact of the matter is that we as people of color live in a country where there is the majority of people that live here, white Americans, don't have to interact with people of color in order to succeed. We do not have that same option. We live in your world, you don't live in ours. And so this idea of there are 228 million white people in this country, and there are 315 million people in the country as a whole. That's a lot of the population. So we live in your world, you don't live, we live in your world, you don't live in ours, so you have to go out and find that in, anyway, images. I think that's really important. Thank you.
I'd like to comment on such forums are excellent and very, very much needed on every campus, everywhere. I work in another university and we try to do this sort of thing. However, there is a basic, essential issue that is here, which I've felt Amir really hit at it very well. It is this colonial aspect of the empire. This is what's going on. Go back to Edward Said. The othering is so essential. That's what makes the differences in these societies. Unless we break these barriers on the minute level of school, education, then university, and the public, you know, as you said very truly, the public in this country is very difficult to break through. You go to Montana, you go to Utah, you go to where you cannot break unless we start from the small education. And the task is very tough, but it's very essential, very important that every educator, every person who has a feeling for the ethics of humanity, because this is what we're at this moment. You know, demonizing Muslims, demonizing, I'm a Palestinian. What is the situation at this moment? Nobody mentioned. It was an essential point of what has happened. The injustice that has happened has created this kind of breaks all through.
Right.
Okay, I'm on. I wanted to jump in and just have a call for people to follow more people of color on Instagram. Listen to Black podcasts. These are really simple things you can do in your daily life that are helping you to know people of these communities. I think that's a good, easy thing for us to do. But Brian had a comment.
Yeah, to the point that everyone made, just one thing I wanted to add is even in university settings, sometimes being willing to like seed the ground in terms of there are other places that are doing things better, even if it's another university or another country. I was just thinking of listening to NPR the other day and how there's, in this particular moment of Islamophobia, how there's refugees who are fleeing from our country and going to Canada. Not that they're perfect, because we know of what happened, you know, in Quebec not a few weeks back, but knowing that you can look at other examples where people are doing things better and identifying, here's something we can aspire to. Here's something that is an alternative to what we're dealing with that doesn't have to be despair only, and also knowing that there's a uniqueness to this being a political moment that, and not to say that we know when it will pass, you know, because being a person of faith, also God knows best when that will pass, but knowing that these are cyclical things, that Islamophobia has a standard that exists in this society, but it ebbs and flows. We're definitely at a peak, or hopefully a peak at this time, but that there's ways in which we can look at other examples, look to communities that are doing things well as examples.
My mic is working again. Does this work? No.
Here, Butch.
There as well.
I just wanted to underline this point about imperialism that has come up in your comments, and actually it's been sort of underlying the whole conversation, and Amir's, especially his intervention. Educating people about the realities of imperialism is absolutely imperative. And it's difficult to kind of overstate the importance of that, because most of the young people that we interact with in classrooms, young white people, are actually not aware of the genocidal histories that white people have been involved in over the past century and a half. And when they're awakened to those, it's not something that they say, yay, go white people. It's something that usually instills a profound sense of social responsibility and a deep questioning. But unless we educate them about it, then they can't have that reaction, you know, one way or the other. And so I teach not just Islam in Africa and courses on Islam, but I also teach pre-colonial African history and colonial African history. So when you know, when I talk about the conquest of Africa by European powers, and how on a single day in 1898, the British conquest of Sudan, there are 20,000 casualties leveled in a span of 3 hours between 6:30 a.m. and 9:30 a.m., and the British suffer 200 casualties, 200 versus 20,000, and that's just one day in the history of imperialism. When after those horrible monsters, you know, kill 130 people, you know, in Paris, and we all condemn it, it's useful to remind people that that's a morning's work in the conquest of Algeria for the French. That's a morning's work. And not just talking about killing people, but there are that many people subject to active torture at any given moment just in one city in Algeria during the French conquest of Algeria. So everybody was upset, you know, when Malcolm, you know, when he talked about, you know, Kennedy being shot, that this is just chickens coming home to roost. But the reality is that imperialism produces negative after effects. And that if we continue to have a conversation about what's taking place here, as if it's completely divorced from all of the violence that has been associated with white supremacy. Look, the fact of the matter is that everybody in America now lives under the terrible fear of the imposition of Sharia law, and the specter that the Muslims will take over the world and subject every single person to their system of doing things. But I hate to break it to you, but the white people did that. It was called imperialism. They colonized every spot on the face of the earth. No place was left uncolonized in the end, at least for a fixed period of time. And that's the reason why people from Malaysia to Morocco wear European-style clothes. A single system for understanding the world and living in the world was imposed violently on the rest of humanity. And until we come to grips with that history of imperialism, we have no answers. We have no answers.
Oh, my mic is still good? Good. All right. Can I have that? That's so much better. This is, I'm not really about this. Sorry. Yeah, that's really something that that's much more my topic of choice of what we were just talking about. It's even though we're just a minute ago, we're going around and everyone in this room understands that, you know, that people of color, Muslims, whatever, are being always repressed in this country, financially, socially, what have you. It still feels like to me, something that I think talked to you about earlier, Amir, was that it's coming down to the folks who are subject to other oppression to do the work for y'all. And it doesn't matter how much education, it doesn't matter how much people go to university or financially stable. It's the fact of, as you were saying earlier, that once white people realize there's so much injustice and that they benefit from it on a day-to-day basis, that gut reaction of, oh wow, I'm taking advantage of someone, or I'm winning because of just simply because I'm a male, just because I'm white or whatever. I've not really seen that too much in my experience of academia in France or in New York, that white folks will take that burden of explaining to I'll give you an example. I'm thinking about Trump when Trump won. I lived in New York City, lived there for 2 years. I knew when Trump won a Republican spot, I knew he was going to win. I was already sure, like, when the burn comes, it's a win. But New York, if I'm wrong, everyone was so like, oh, we still have a shot, we still have a shot.
We're crying.
But it's like, have you talked to your parents? Have you talked to your partners? Have you talked to your brothers, your sisters? I mean, you might be a liberal person who goes to a certain college out of Midwest or even in the Midwest, but it's this notion of people of color, femmes have to take the labor to not only survive and to work within white supremacy, but also to teach you white supremacy. It's kind of a never-ending battle. So I also feel like there has to be more from the oppressed to realize, and to the time to realize their own privilege in a way.
Well, if I could, to go off that, this irrational fear of Sharia law. You know, I was in Egypt and there's no Sharia law in New York City. There's no Sharia law in the United States, although there's a completely misinterpretation of what Sharia law is. You know, praying 5 times a day and fasting during Ramadan. It's Sharia law. In Egypt, they have McDonald's, so who won that battle of ideology right there? So it's who has more to fear from the other. It's no different than the Red Scare that this country faced to justify its spending all this spending all this money on military, and justifying its imperialist ambitions in Asia and in Europe. That now we have to justify all this military spending in the Middle East for these corporations, and that's why we have to propagate this fear. If you're afraid of them, you're more willing to accept the fact that we're bombing them, because then it's us or them, and that's what's happening here. We have to come to grips with and all these issues: racism, sexism, Islamophobia, whatever. It's all connected. They're not separate issues. One is dependent on another. It's not even intersectional. It's compounded. Each one supports the other. And we have to, and that's how you build alliances. So if somebody doesn't think Islamophobia is an issue of them, but they're having trouble finding a job, and they're poor, and they got laid off, and they're living in a rural area where there's nobody's funding them, you can say, why is all this money going to bomb these countries that have nothing to do with you? And that money can be invested in your communities. And that's how you build alliances, by connecting all the separate issues people think that are separate and showing that they're all interconnected. You know, and we have to start understanding that the American empire and its imperialist ambitions is causing many of the economic problems in this country. It's the root of Islamophobia. Racism is dependent on it. It's no coincidence we're bombing brown countries and black countries. And that's how we got to think of it. And we have to stop being silent about these issues, especially liberal people think they're liberal, but there's a banality of evil if we just continue allowing these things to happen and stay silent and think you're enlightened more than anyone else. We have to stand up and create an anti-imperialist movement in this country, an anti-war movement. And that's how you're going to build those alliances and solidarities along different racial groups and different groups that think that otherwise they're isolated. And they'll come together in understanding that their common interest is ending this American empire. They're bombing all these nations, spending all this money and wasting so many lives on the gains of the few, which are these rich capitalist imperialist pigs. So, next question.
I think a great point that was brought up was about representation and imagery. Gadeen and Professor Ware also touched upon the sort of overwhelmingly South Asian or immigrant representation in Islam in the United States, and that's very, very critical to discuss. As someone who is from a Pakistani American background, I know from within this community, the Pakistani American community, regarding marriages, there is a huge issue, and this hits particularly close to home for my family. And I think having conversations for Muslim student groups about issues of marriages, dating, things like that, need to definitely be addressed. Gender, a lot of other topics that are taboo in the Muslim American community need to be addressed. In terms of the wider community, what can we do? I personally think that children's literature is something that's a really awesome avenue to get folks sort of. When we think of children's literature, it's kind of like a brainwashing at a young age, but if that can be done to make kids, children more enlightened and have a wider worldview. I work at the Ann Arbor District Library, and there are a number of folks who will check out books, Islam 101, Islam for Dummies, the Quran, and this is becoming increasingly popular these days. Children's literature is something that I would encourage folks to sort of go after, and especially about people of color, Muslim Americans, all those different groups that exist.
Curious George, they have the Curious George Celebrates Ramadan book came out. I don't know if you ever saw. Yeah, you saw that? Yeah, man.
That's good.
He was very mischievous in that one.
Is this working? No. It actually might be working? No. Okay. Actually, I don't have a comment for that. I was going to actually go back to a comment Professor Sekeli had made. I actually don't know where she is now, but anyway, in talking about what we can do as educators, I think what we need is a multifaceted approach. So if your specialty, if you know about the history of American imperialism and that's the approach you want, great. For me personally, I'm an Islamic studies professor. So for me, it's teaching about Islam, and I find that people do actually change when they hear, when they hear the other side. And I think, what's necessary is to kind of be familiar with the other side of these issues. So I have this really weird obsession with going on anti-Islamic websites and reading what they're saying, because that's what some of my students are reading. So I think, and it's really uncomfortable. I feel like I have to take a shower afterwards, but I think we have to do that. I think we have to read what people are saying. Because if we don't address them, then people just assume that I'm being apologetic or I don't know or whatever. So we have to, I think, address some of these things head on.
Thanks for the opportunity to listen in and participate today, and thanks for coming to campus. One of my biggest concerns is that we're all, I think, speaking in groups where we're like-minded or nearly like-minded. And I've experienced that even since the election. People that I've known for 20, 30 years who I know voted for Trump, I can't speak to them anymore. And I'm wondering what your strategies are, how often you go into areas where people really are different, and how you approach that and what you find is effective. Because I'm finding that increasingly difficult to do, and I see society being divided into smaller and smaller groups, and the kind of spaces that we had, like public schools, where everybody was all brought together, those kinds of spaces, I think, are disappearing.
I can, I guess, talk about, at least for us three, on our play anyway. Even though I do agree with you, mostly what we do, actually all of our performances we have been at has been a more liberal education or West Coast, Northeast universities. That's mainly for two reasons. If one, it's as this is us three and two other brown folks, and with the Chinese American director, we can't just waltz down to Louisiana and do this play, obviously. And that could be for safety, but also because they wouldn't listen to us on the first hand. And secondly, as I was kind of referencing earlier, even in these liberal bubbles, there's so much misguided information, there's so much blatant false information going on that we need to keep preaching to the choir. It's a Martin Luther King quote that I'm going to paraphrase about like how preaching to the choir is necessary, because you get to preach to the choir will forget what they're singing about. And it just kind of reinforces the reason of why, as at least from our play, we need to be here constantly showing our face, showing our super diverse stories of how Islam affected us, prolonged us, what have you. I don't really have an answer to that statement of how we could go to more conservative red state areas, but I do know without white folks helping us, as I was saying earlier, of talking to their cousins or their parents or what have you, and also checking their own resources, you're checking what they're reading and where they're reading it from. Are you reading about Islam from, not that you can't have a white professor, but are you checking out like more professors of color from those areas? Or are you going to reading books in those areas? You're just getting it all from the same people who look like you, who have a similar belief system as you. That can also really kind of affect how it's being portrayed to you. So.
Yeah, of course. So I had a really pleasant conversation on an airplane, about a 2-hour conversation with a gentleman named JD from Houston, Texas, who was a Trump supporter. And I gave him a version, actually, of the talk that I gave to begin here. I told him what the Quran says about the common origin of humanity and where racism and hatred come from. And he loved it. And he said, I didn't know it was so much of the Bible in the Quran. And so I think that the issue goes back to the question of loving one another and knowing one another. The fact of the matter is we that live in these liberal bubbles aren't aware that we also are tainted by hatred.
Mm-hmm.
We don't realize the extent to which we hold whole branches of the human family in utter contempt. We don't realize the extent to which our own negative experiences, like being called nigger 5 times a week, affect our outlook on huge branches of the human family. And therefore, we have a revulsion. We have sometimes a physical reaction that doesn't allow us to sit with people that we think of as the enemy. And that is the exact problem that I identified at the outset in my talk, is that that's how pride spreads. It spreads through microaggressions from one heart to another. And that we actually have to create those circumstances where people that don't see eye to eye come together and just learn to sit with one another, be comfortable in one another's presence, and then eventually come to benefit from one another. JD and I had a good old time after that. We had a blast. We talked about everything, from after, the fall of Iblis to football. Because in the end, he's a human being. And the Quran says that indeed your creation and your resurrection is none other than that of a single soul. We're all borrowing God's own breath through our ancestor Adam. Whether we understand it or not, human destinies are all intertwined. There's no harm that's done to another human being that doesn't ultimately affect you. And as long as we continue to be the instruments of that harm through divisiveness, then we're just giving lip service to wanting to be part of the solution. When we retract into those bubbles and don't talk to people who aren't like us, how are we different from the people on the other side?
Mm-hmm.
I defy you to explain to me how we're different than the people on the other side.
We get that a lot, preaching to the choir, when we do our show, especially in the New York area. Bastion of liberalism, people think, and people say it's they also use the terminology, we live in a liberal bubble, and I'm about to burst that bubble right now. New York was the site of the Ground Zero mosque controversy, right? So there was going to be a mosque that was going to be built several blocks away from Ground Zero, and people got so offended by this, and as if a mosque was going to be built right at the center of where the World Trade Centers were, and even if there were, anyway, but there was this idea that it was going to be this terrible, Islamic conquest monument to they got us, and it was this huge controversy that was in New York, and people forget that. It wasn't that long ago. So this idea that we're preaching to the choir and we're in these liberal bubbles, that's not necessarily true. There has been hate crimes, plenty of hate crimes. They shot an imam. somebody ripped off the headscarf of a woman right on Fifth Avenue and burned it. So these things aren't, there's not a liberal, there's no place that's exclusively one ideology or another. There's people that think these things everywhere. But to the sense of we're preaching to the choir, you know, it comes off a little bit arrogant, you know. It's as if we know everything and we're not the ones you have to convince, you know, it's them over there. And it's still making an us versus them argument that they're not enlightened and we are. And that's not necessarily true, because a lot of liberals, regardless of how they feel personally about Muslims and other people, you know, they would have gladly supported Hillary Clinton and gladly supported any other war that she would have caused, and gladly stay silent about a lot of these imperialist wars. Where my argument being that those are the things that those are the foundations of Islamophobia. And that's what we have to target. So this idea that we're preaching to the choir, I always say, well, if the choir ain't going out and evangelizing this message we're giving, then what's the point? You know, you could sit here, you listen to us, this was very nice, you feel good about yourself, you go home, and that's it, it's over. It shouldn't be over. This should be the beginning of any other conversation, going out and be reinvigorated, you know. It's good to come to spaces like this. Maybe you forget. Maybe you get pessimistic about things. Maybe you get tired of constantly fighting and talking politics and stuff. But when you come to a space like this, or you come see our show, hopefully Saturday night at 8 o'clock. Where was it? Power
Center.
The Power Center. Come by. It's sold out? Yes. Well, I'm sure there'll be people, you know, selling fake tickets.
And it's being live streamed. It's not sold out, and it's being live streamed on the internet.
Being live streamed. Oh, I'm sure we got comp tickets. It'll reinvigorate you to go out and continue organizing in your communities and not allowing. We got 4 years of this Trump menace, right? What are we going to do in those 4 years? Are we going to vote for Hillary and we're going to continue with Democrats? Or are we going to think we're going to be refreshed and say, okay, maybe we have to do something more. We have to go beyond just playing it safe or playing into the politics of fear and voting for the lesser of two evils. In my argument, evil's evil. There's no such thing. There's no such thing as one lesser or one's more or less. We have to continue to destroy this evil imperialist structure that we're in. So, you know, I'm a Marxist if you can't tell, but.
I'm Jim. I'm the Director of Education and Engagement for UMS, so I've had the pleasure of hanging out with these cast members today.
The lunch was very nice.
Well, and their day started, I just wanted to share that their day started with their fellow cast members performing the show this morning at 11 a.m. For about 700 high school students from Plymouth, Canton, Ann Arbor, East Detroit, Michigan, and Ypsilanti High School. It was a wildly different groups of students from very different kinds of communities. And I have we were talking about how to work on educating children, and part of the reason that I wanted this performance to be on the season for kids in our communities is because I remember growing up in the suburbs of Metro Detroit and having absolutely no educational encounters with Islam at all, probably until I came to the University of Michigan as an undergrad. And so I thought it was also just very interesting today because we're talking about preaching to the choir, and I can guarantee you that was not a choir there. And we had a really complicated exchange between two young women. Amir had said something, just kind of commented on how at one point in his life he had thought about kind of dressing like a cowboy so that he could sort of fit in as an American, right?
And being sarcastic.
And he's being sarcastic, yes. And this young woman took it very personally, in a sense, and said, you know, I wear cowboy boots, and people think I'm a hick, and I'm from the country, and that's very hard too. And that really made many of the other students very angry. And the counterpoint to that exchange was that woman being called out by another young woman whose family is being affected by the travel ban very directly. I hope that was an educational experience for both of those women in a certain way. But I mean, that was the kind of thing that I hope that we can create more opportunity for, although I don't think it necessarily even felt good to any of us that it was happening in the way that it did. I think it was hard for everybody involved, especially I think for all of you as performers on the stage, having to sort of defend not only your work, but also your identities and who you are as people. So I just feel very grateful to have had that opportunity to do that with you this morning. Thank you.
I have a good segue to that. I'm a volunteer who's been working with AFS intercultural programs for over 50 years to bring cultures together and help people learn to understand each other. And since 9/11, right after 9/11, we approached the Congress, and Kennedy and Lugar went together to start a scholarship that brings students from primarily Muslim countries to the United States to study for a year and live with an American host family. And I loved your beginning comment about arachnophobia, because I do think Islamophobia has a lot to do, a lot in common with arachnophobia, because once you learn that little spiders eat the other bad things in your house, you care for them and you take care of them. I never kill a spider. No one is allowed in my house to kill a spider. They get transported outside in the summer, but they winter in the house if they get left over. And also in my house is this lovely young lady from Egypt who is my daughter now. And is having a year at Pioneer High School where she's meeting lots and lots of people. I'm going to give the microphone to her in just a second. But I wanted to say that I do believe that after all these years working towards understanding of other cultures, that it does happen at a one-to-one basis. You have to get right down to one person to one person. And by meeting people from other cultures, meeting people of other colors, meeting people of other religions, you begin to, yes, recognize their humanity. And that's where we start. And I would like to encourage people to, the question that started this discussion was how can educational institutions help? And I think that in this world of phony news, that providing, supporting the search for truth is very, very important. I think that once you have that truth and you've done your research and you have your own experiences, to share the truth is so very important, one-to-one or as far as you can go in the media or creating community forums, I think is fantastic. What you had going this morning, I work as a volunteer at Ypsilanti High School, and I know that what you had there this morning was just glorious, and I'm so sorry I missed it. So thanks to everyone for doing your own part. And now I'm going to let my daughter say a few words.
Okay. Well, I came here, I crossed the ocean, I left all my family, I left my friends, I left my high school, I'm just 16, and I came to sit with a host family, being in a high school with people that I don't know, because I wanted to share like how different I am, and how it's not a bad thing to be different. It's so good, and you can you're special the way that you are. And first I came here, I came to Minnesota, and I wasn't in Michigan. I went to high school, and something happened. I don't remember the exact event, but somebody stabbed someone in the mall. I don't remember. And I was Muslim, and I was studying in my government class. And then they started to discuss that how we can protect ourselves from Muslims. And I just raised my hand and I said, I was there for like 2 months, and I said, well, I am Muslim. And I started to cry because I didn't know what to say or how I can I'm just like you. And then I had friends, and after the class, they came to me and they said, well, we love you. We have been with you for like 2 months, and you're just an awesome. We are friends. We hang together and all this kind of stuff. And then when I moved to here and I went to Pioneer High School, I was struggling at the beginning to make friends and to get involved, but then I met a boy that he was kind of smiling to me, and he just wanted to come and start conversation, and I started to say like, hi, I'm an exchange student and I'm from Egypt, and I'm gonna stay here for a year. And he just, when he heard that I'm from Egypt, and he said, oh, from Egypt, and he started to walk like away, and I was, wait, what's wrong? Like, it's I'm not gonna eat you. I'm not gonna kill you. I'm just different. And I wanna know how you are different, and I want you to know how I'm different. There's nothing that's right or wrong. This is what I have learned. There is just different. And that's it.
Mabruk.
Professor Ware has to leave a little bit early, so he's just going to give some closing.
Forgive me, I have a child care coverage issue, so I need to make sure that my son, I'm waiting for my son when he gets off the bus because he'll freak out if I'm not there. So I just wanted to bring together a few things, my own reflections, and actually going off of the experience that they had in the conversation after the play today, which I did not witness, but it evokes a lot of things for me. I remember the day when American democracy ended. It was the day that Rush Limbaugh went on the air. And the reason is that it created this space where there was a new America that came into being. This goes back to the question of media exposure. It started to create a dialogue that never existed any time previously in American history since Reconstruction, which was that white people were the victims in the story of humanity. That it was the same to have jokes told about you because of cowboy boots as it was to suffer systematic racial oppression for 400 years. That it's the same to have your basic civil rights removed as to not have your personal tastes and preferences affirmed. That in the great human drama, that the most powerful people in this country were in fact being victimized by everyone else. And that has been an incredibly insidious move in American history. And it's the media exposure which has fed that. And that people have created these bubbles where that's all they hear. They've created echo chambers where their identity is affirmed, and they never learn a single thing about white supremacy. They never learn a single thing about imperialism, and they come to equate their own individual struggles with people that have to face systematic racial, cultural, economic oppression. Born on third base and thought you hit a triple. You've got one base to go, whereas some people have to cover all four. And that has become such a deeply rooted problem, and that's one of the main things that drove the Trump phenomenon. It is that we've created a space where hate speech became commonplace. And that's why it's extremely important that hate can only be countered with love. It can only be defeated with connections between the hearts of individual human beings, like the young sister just reminded us. It's back to what the Quran said in the first place, is that the reason why you're here is that you can know one another. And the whole reason why humanity comes into being in the first place is to create something that's worthy of God's love. Human beings have the capacity to turn towards good, or they have the capacity to turn towards evil. Everything else in creation, with one exception, has to obey. And that's both the great weakness and the great strength of the human being. It's this free will that we have. And we have to exercise that free will in the path of love as much as we can, and we have to encourage others to do so as well. So I just thank you guys for coming together in this gathering of love and knowledge. Yeah, I have to go, otherwise I'm going to miss my son. Yes.
Okay. How can you show that you love who are creating this Islamophobia? What can be the procedures that you can show them that those people who are creating this Islamophobia, that you love them?
With my fist. Okay.
Okay, I got to go get Idris. Amir, can you take that one for me?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll let the Marxists handle that one.
You read comic books? No, okay. You know Captain America? You know, comic character, Captain America? Okay, so there's a character called Captain America, right? And he was a propaganda comic book created during World War II. And he was fighting Nazis. And he was hitting Nazis in the face, right? And then I remember seeing, this is probably going to be a much different answer than he would have given. But then there was those memes where that Nazi guy, that alt-right guy, was getting punched in the face, and then people were arguing about whether it was right to punch a Nazi in the face. You know, I make the argument, it says if a Captain America could punch a Nazi in the face, then we could sure punch a Nazi in the face. So that's how I see it. I'm not big on the fighting fighting hate with love, because I think I'm a big proponent of there's a yin and a yang. You need opposites to exist. You can't have love without some sort of hate existing, and we can't love. I'm not a big love your enemy type of person, because they hate me, right? They hate what we represent. They hate Muslims. They hate black people. They hate Chinese people, Mexicans, whatever it may be. That hate can't be countered with "I love you." I don't think history works that way. History works in a way where you have to hate your enemy, and that's what gives you the drive to fight and continue standing up. That's what gives you anger. You need anger because you have to get angry about things. Hate and anger are not enough. You need to counter that with also reason. You have to be very mindful of strategy. But I think a lot of it has to be about power. I don't think it's power dynamics. They have the power, we don't. That's what it's about. They're in power, we don't. I can't love you into power. We need power, and that's how you exercise. Your agenda. You know, they have the agenda. They have all the power. They can make up all the rules. And unless we fight for the same thing, we fight for power, then we're going to constantly be subordinate to their will. So I'm all about power, and I'm not all about love and
I think you need to fight hatred with some logic or mind, not just with love.
yeah, it's not.
Some ways to do it.
Well, there's this myth that India gained its independence because of Gandhi, and that's not necessarily 100% true. Like Gandhi had this peaceful movement. No, there was a lot of blood that spilled during the Indian independence movement. There was a lot of blood that spilled in the civil rights movement. It wasn't all about just, we're going to love our enemy. It wasn't that easy. Martin Luther King strategy only worked to some point until he went into Chicago. And in Chicago, the love wasn't working there. They were throwing stones and sticks and bricks at him. So this idea that you're going to love your enemy and you're going to appeal to their morality, I think is a myth that disempowers us. And I'm 100% for fighting and being angry about these things, justified in fighting for power. That's the only difference. It's not about morality at all. It's about who controls what. That's how I see things.
That leads easily to imperialism.
Exactly, and war and everything else.
If you talk about gaining power or having the same power or even overpower somebody.
Well, not necessarily.
Leads to a power struggle.
Not necessarily, because I think with imperialism, it's the powerful countries, such as the United States, going to a country that is disempowered and taking control of it. And it's one thing having power over somebody than fighting for political power, and that's how you gain a political voice. The right gained political power, and now we're under suppression constantly. Our rights are constantly being attacked.
Well, you're taking your power back.
I don't think we ever had it, but.
Well, this is what I'm saying in response to what was just said there. Is that isn't the same thing, because it's as if, let's just say, thank you so much, with the colonist fighting against the British, they were trying to they were fighting against them to take the power to live their lives the way they wanted to live it. It's the same kind of thing. So to say that now ultimately did it lead to imperialism, yes. But that took a long time for that to actually happen, but they had to fight against this thing that was oppressing them in a similar way that we're talking about right now, is that, and I think, well, what history do we know? We know the history of the United States, which is George Washington cut down a cherry tree, Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, Adolf Hitler killed the Jews, and Barack Obama was the first black president. That is American History 101. It doesn't talk about a lot of other things that happened between that time, but that's the way it's taught. But I think that I completely agree with what you're saying, is this idea of fighting that level of hatred with love and compassion and understanding basically is setting you up to continue to be beat down because you are coming to a knife fight with a rose instead of with a knife yourself or with a gun. Because if I'm having to fight for my right to live, I'm bringing every gun I have, everything I can, because you have it all already. I just wanted to speak to, but that's something else that was said before that I wanted to speak to, was this idea of, it really is troubling to me to hear a white person say that they have Trump-supporting friends that they can no longer speak to, because the level of access that that person has to those people, I do not have. And what I mean by that is that if I'm a black person, I go up to a white person and say, you shouldn't vote for Donald Trump. He says that all black people live in the inner city, da-da-da-da-da. And they're just gonna sit there and say, oh my God, typical. This is what a black person would say. If I go and I say all that to you, these people, he da-da-da-da-da, but then you go to that person and you say, I have this friend, and this is how he feels. He's black. And there is a wall that comes down that's what an ally is that you help us to get through the walls. Because the thing is that when people start talking about things like race and religion, all these walls go up. And as far removed as you are from what you're talking about, that's how many walls are gonna go up. So if you're white and I'm black, there's a big wall between us because I don't wanna offend you, I don't wanna say the wrong thing, I don't want you to leave. Who'd you vote for? I didn't vote, undecided. Okay, that sort of thing. Then you turn around and you say, who'd you vote for? Well, I downloaded Trump. I know you're gonna hate me and all this different stuff, but we're so much alike. So it's like, that to me is what an ally has to do, is that you have to have those tough conversations, because as difficult as it is for you to talk to another white person that voted for Donald Trump, it is 20 times more difficult for me and completely fruitless, basically,
Thank you for that. I want to end on one. Oh, Tiffany, go ahead, and then I have a final question for the audience and the panelists.
Oh, I just wanted to say, I think love is important, because love is essential to helping people grow and become more understanding people. And if you're in a situation where you can love or fight, and you can pick either one or the other, I would choose to love. And I think telling your own stories is so important, because you shouldn't let other people tell your stories for you. You have to tell it through your own mouth and let people understand where you're coming from and what you want to say through your eyes of what you experienced. And sharing your experience with people who are different than you, that'll help them understand you better and find commonality and common ground on what you want to say, and through your own life experience. And maybe you'll have the same experience as somebody else who's maybe a different race than you. And it's hard to understand oppression when you haven't lived it. However, you can use respect and encourage use respect to encourage your actions. And that's important to remember as well. And I really believe that love rules over all. And love is gonna get us through a lot of things that we underestimate the power of love. And it's so powerful that maybe we don't always see it.
Okay, so it's about 4 o'clock, so we're going to wrap up here soon. But I have one final question. We've kind of danced around this idea of allyship, and I would like to know what an ally really looks like, because I would consider myself one, and I struggle often to really put that into action. So, please.
You want to start this way?
Well, I wanted to comment on something else, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, do it.
Can I comment on the other thing?
Yeah,
Okay.
why not?
Well, I was going to comment on the love question. I think there's no one answer to your question. I think it all depends on context. I think there's a time for peace and there's a time for self-defense. The example of Martin Luther King was very interesting, right? In Chicago, he's attacked, and there's another example where one of my colleagues at Michigan State, he witnessed this. A man went up to Martin Luther King and put up a gun to him. Said, "What's going to stop me from killing you right now, N-word?" And Martin Luther King just looked at him and said, "I love you, brother." And the guy couldn't do anything. He was just kind of overcome by this. So I think it just depends on the context.
It's like you talk about love. I don't hate Trump supporters. I don't hate. And I don't think so they did an but they have been brainwashed about immigrants and Muslims and everything. Maybe they are right in their own ways. They think this country is in danger. So talking about love, then why do we hate Trump supporters? I think, yeah, I don't know if it makes sense or something. I don't know.
I just think Trump supporters come from like an uneducated society of people. Like, and people who also live in like the city of New York and stuff and voted for Trump, like they have no compassion for other people, and like they can't relate to other groups of people, so they're having trouble like getting outside of their own world.
Okay, I'm new here, so I don't know much.
It's helpful to lump Trump supporters into one category, just like we don't want Muslims lumped into one category.
I think that's just doing a disservice to everybody. I mean, I think people voted for Trump for very different reasons. So I just don't think I don't think that's a healthy way of acting. And I think the main thing we all need to do on a daily basis is listen, is really, truly listen and be open to many different sources of information. I think that's a big problem with our society. Liberal, conservative, what have you. So I could say more, but.
That's kind of was an answer to your original question, was kind of what you're saying, was just listening. You just said, you see yourself as a very strong ally, and I'm sure you are, but as the point was just saying, was more just listening. Has your friends of color told you you're a good ally? Is that like a thing that you've gotten from them? Have you like been on the?
I didn't claim to be a good one. I just said that I am one.
Oh, I know, but I'm saying like.
I want to be a good one. How can I be a good one?
And you could be one by like listening and being tended to like the POCs or WCs around you. I mean, it's really as small as even like checking. Oh, it's good. Checking your own like microaggressions, as they were saying earlier. It's we have so much experiences and trauma from negative experiences growing up through, based on sexuality, based on gender, finances, what have you, and that is something that it really does. I feel like it really does affect how you interact in your day. I mean, yeah, I could be as well-versed as I would like to think, but I still have prejudices of, oh, well, if I go back home to the South, I'll expect X, Y, Z. That's not always the case, and I feel like to be a strong ally is really as simple as taking a step back from your own space of privilege, your own space of comfort, and listening to people who you supposedly care about. I think this is really that simple. It's just kind of listen to what your folks around you are saying, like, hey, this is what I need from you. You can be as small as, I need to be at this protest, or I need you to listen to me rant about mean white people for 10 minutes, like that makes you a great ally.
And asking them what they need.
Yeah.
Caring about
exactly.
the needs of these
like,
people.
Hearing the needs of them, yeah.
Related to the question about allyship, and also Amir's comment about organizing.
Yes.
There's a new initiative. I mean, organizing is what we need to do. There's a new initiative. It's called the Arena Summit. It's bipartisan. It's national. It's people who've come together in the wake of the election, realizing that we need to organize and we need to find authentic candidates for local office. We need to rebuild from the ground up. Take back the state houses so we can reapportion, so we can get rid of gerrymandering, so we can find, and the only prerequisites for people to run are forswearing racism, sexism, transphobia, homophobia, xenophobia, etc. Aside from that, you're all good, but authentic. And so there'll be, there was a meeting in Nashville in December, there'll be one in Raleigh the end of March, then there'll be one in the Midwest during the summer. I'm happy, I can give to Ken Fisher, et cetera, the sort of the information, the link to it, but to get involved, those people, I urge all of you want to run, local office, school board, zoning board, anything, local, take it back, and then the rest of us will support the authentic candidates, because unless we get involved, nothing's going to change.
Well, in terms of allyship, I don't like this word. I never liked this word. I always saw everything is interconnected. So there's an old Aboriginal saying where if you came to help me with my liberation struggle, then go home. But if you came because your liberation is tied to my liberation, then we have something going here. That's a paraphrase, of course. But that's how I see it. If you're coming to help me because you feel bad for my struggle and you want to and you feel guilty and you want to come and help me. No, you're coming, if your liberation is tied with my liberation, if you see that your freedom is tied with gaining my freedom, then we have something to talk about. Now we have some common ground. But it still implies a hierarchy, that I'm coming down to help you, and I feel bad for you, and I feel guilty because I have this particular privilege, and I'm going to come and give you a lifting hand. That's not the correct way to see it. We have to see that, no, I cannot live a liberated existence without fighting together for your liberation, because my liberation is tied with your liberation. And that's how we see it, and that's how we move forward. But if you continue to believe that you're going to come and help me, that's not going to go anywhere. You know, that's a lot of people came and helped in the civil rights movement, and because they felt bad and they wanted to help, and this is not right. But as soon as the civil rights movement moved north, they weren't to be seen. As soon as Martin Luther King Jr. took a stance on the Vietnam War, they were nowhere to be seen. So you have to be able to, because Martin Luther King recognized his liberation and his freedom was tied with the liberation of Vietnam. Now that's why he stuck his neck on the limb and took that stance in a time when no one else was, because he recognized that he cannot gain the freedoms in the United States of America unless the people of Vietnam were free. And that's what we have to see. We have to connect our struggle, all our independent struggles, the Latino struggle, the black struggle, the Muslim struggle, the gay liberation struggle, women's struggle, and tie them in together, and it's one struggle, you know, and that's how we're going to move forward.
So I think that's an excellent note to end on, because it sort of it encapsulates, I think, what this country is going through right now, which is trying to go back to the ideals that we all stand by, which is that this is a country in which, you know, all people are supposed to be treated equally under the law, and we have laws being used against people, and it can happen to any of us, right? That's the message. We are all tied together. Our fates are all tied together, right? And I just want to thank everybody for being here today. I want to thank especially our panelists, as I know it's very difficult sometimes to share personal experiences. And especially I want to thank Muhammad Khalil for driving all the way from Lansing to be here. I really appreciate it. And I hope we continue the discussion, the dialogue, and really listen to each other. I think that is really critical. So again, thank you.
How's it going?
I'm having